This shir is dedicated Le'ilu Nishmosoi of Chaim Yisucher ben Yechiel Zeidel Dov, our unforgettable friend, Chaim Feigenbaum. The topic we will be discussing today is a very interesting one. But first of all, let me just express Hoidoya and gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Once again, we're starting a new year and starting Parshas Bereishis. And every time we start Parshas Bereishis, it's with a tremendous feeling of Simchas HaTorah and the Koros HaTorah. It symbolizes, after dancing Simchas Torah, Lagam Rosh Torah, that the Simcha of the Gemar is actually a Simcha of Hatchola. In this most pleasant and magnificent endeavor, in the greatest intellectual simcha, which is Eisek HaTorah, it is unique because in every other field we find great scholars that, okay, they're through with it. You know, he has his degrees, he learned enough, now he's teaching. But in Talmud Torah, the greatest Gedolim always demonstrated a tremendous thirst for Torah knowledge, and the more we learn, the more we realize how little we know, and there's so much still that we don't know. So the Simcha of Simchas Torah is actually a Simcha of Nuat Chola, and that is the reason every time we make a Siyam Masechta, we say Hadran Alach, will be back, we will revisit, we will come back once again. And every time we finish a Masechta or any other portion of the Torah, it is only a new beginning. We close one door and many others open. So Baruch Hashem, we're starting Parshas Bereishis again. The topic we will be discussing today is not directly dealing with Parshas Bereishis, but an interesting approach or observation. In the Chet of Odom Harishon, Chazal obviously tried to look for somewhat of an explanation. How is it possible that Yetzir Kapav Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, man that was just created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, and how did he fail his first and most basic test? Odom Harishon had one mitzvah, keep away from the Eitz Hadas, and he failed. And he failed on the first day of creation. So obviously, this sugi is above and beyond the realm of human understanding. We are dealing with the Odom HaGodel Ba'anokim. We are dealing with something we really know nothing about. But Afro Piken, with a halachic approach, let's deal with this question. So in Medrash Rabbah, Parsha Yutes, hey, Vatikach mepirioi vatochal, omerev ivi, sachto anovim v'natnalo. She squeezed out juice from the grapes, and that is what Chava gave Odom Harishon. Rab Samlui oima b'yishuv adat ba'at alav. She came with argumentation, and the Pre-Torah, the Fei Torah, one of the most basic and important commentaries on the Medrash, explains what is this argumentation about. What is the machlokes? Rabbi Ivi says that Odom Harishon was a shoygig. He had no idea that the wine he is being given is from the Eitz Hadas. It wasn't the fruit; it was actually juice, and he was totally unaware that he's drinking from the Eitz Hadas. Rab Samloi finds this argument unreasonable, and therefore his opinion is that he was very well aware that it's the Eitz Hadas, but she just was very convincing. She came up with compelling arguments, and she convinced him that it's worth a try. So according to Rav Ili, the Yefei Torah explains that the taina of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Odom Harishon was not, why did you eat the Eitz Hadas, but why didn't you check? Why did you rely on Chava? Why didn't you ask? Why didn't you inquire? Why didn't you check? And that is the taina, and therefore he was punished, and we are all paying the price of the Chet Eitz Hadas, as we know from the Torah and from many sources in Divrei Chazal. The Orach Chaim goes even to greater extremes, and the Orach Chaim appears twice. Bereishis Gimel Posek Yud Beis and Vayikro Aleph Posek Beis. In the beginning of Vayikro, the Orach Chaim quotes Medrash Tanchuma. The Posek regarding Korban Chata says, the Lashon of Odom ki yechte, Odom ki yakrev. And the Medrash Tanchuma says that Adam alludes to Adam Harishon. Just like Adam Harishon was a shoygig, there is no korban chatas only by a shoygig. And Orach Chaim quotes and sends us to what he wrote in Parshas Bereishis. And in Parshas Bereishis he writes Ba'arichas Gedola, with great length, that Adam Harishon was a shoygig and maybe even an oines, and that is less than a shoygig, because why would he doubt the honesty and the ehrlichkeit of Chava? Chava was created by Kodesh Baruch Hu, and Chava gave him to eat from the Eitz Hadas. Why would we think that Adam shouldn't trust Chava? Chava wasn't just a stranger. I mean, the person that introduced, not the person, but the one that introduced Chava to Adam was a great shadchan, and that was Kodesh Baruch Hu himself, who was Mezavik Zevugim. He created Chava for Adam, but therefore the Orach Chaim says Adam Harishon was totally an oines, because he relied on Chava. He wasn't aware that it's the Eitz Hadas. V'afal piken, that is Chet Adam Harishon. The Orach Chaim in his lengthy discussion quotes the Gemara in Kedushin Ayin Vav, Ein boy kimen hamizbeach ve'lamala. Umiyato, ein biyad Adam oven el shoygig ve'efshe shedin oines yesh lo. So that is the argument of the Orach Chaim. Now, so what I would like to discuss today is a short discussion about what is the significance of an aveda b'shoygig or ba'oines. The person is not to be punished, but nevertheless, is there some gather of aveda or not? So the Ramban in Sha'ar HaGemul, which is extremely interesting, and I quoted this Ramban a few different places in my sform. The Ramban in the first perek of Sha'ar HaGemul deals with why does a shoygig have to bring a korban? Is he a transgressor? Is he a choitei? I mean, he had no bad intentions. So the Ramban writes two different explanations, two different approaches. Number one, machet o, I'm quoting the Rosh of the Ramban, שלא נזהר בעצמו, ולא היה ירא וחרד על דברי המקום ברוך הוא, שלא יאכל ולא יעשה דבר עד שיבדוק יופי יפה, ויתגלה לו הדבר שהוא מותר וראוי לו לפי גזירותיו של הקודש ברוך הוא, ועל זה הדרך הוא הטעם חטא השגוגו בכל התורה כולו. So the Ramban writes, a choite does bear responsibility to a certain extent, to a certain degree, because if he would truly be yoreh v'choreh, if he would truly have Yireh Shamayim, he probably wouldn't be nichshal. If he would check and inquire and be extremely careful and cautious with all his actions and whatever he does, with all his deeds, then probably he wouldn't get there. But the Ramban also offers a different approach, and he writes, V'oid, shekol dover ha'osor melachlechet ha'nefesh u'mitameh אותה. לפיכך נקרא השויגג חוטא. ואף על פי כן אין השויגג ראוי להיענש על שגיגתו בגיהנום ובהרשחת, אלא שהוא צריך מירוק מאותו עוון ולהתקדש ולהיטהר ממנו, כדי שיהיה ראוי למעלה ההגנס למעשה וטובים ביועלם הבא. לפיכך חס הקודש ברוך על עמו ועל חסידיו ונתן להם הקורבנות להתכפר בהם השגגות. So the second approach of the Ramban is the person bears no responsibility. He had no bad intentions, but nevertheless the chet is poigim in the nefesh, and it is melach lecha nefesh, and he needs to cleanse his nefesh, and that is what the korban chatas does. And therefore he isn't punished, but he has to bring the korban chatas Kadesh ulehitaher. So these are two different approaches of the Ramban in Sha'ar HaGemul. Would oines be the same? I think probably not, because, well, an oines is potam chatos. There are many sources in Shas. Only a shoygig brings a chatos and not an oines, which seems to prove that oines is by definition different. And I think oines is different than a shoygig according to both explanations of the Ramban. Because when we're dealing with an oines, it was beyond his power to abstain from that aveda. There are different forms and formulations of oines. Oines could be somebody that was forced, coerced to do things which he had no intention of doing. And it could be physical coercion, it could be by threat. If you're not going to do so and so, you're going to be punished, you're going to be killed. Or this could be a situation like the Gemara in hiוםהשחור, Shnei Edom, two Edom came and said, Meis Balo, and she married Al-Pi Edom. And the din Torah is, she is totally permitted to get married, Al-Pi Shnayim Edom Yokum Dover, or by Psak Beis Din and similar situations. That would be considered an oinus. And sometimes, as we all know, strange and different things happen in the course of life. So, oinus is basically defined by a situation in which it was above and beyond the person's power to do something or to abstain from doing something. And therefore, probably the argument that if you would be a Yerei Shemayim, you wouldn't get into this situation, wouldn't be relevant to a matzav ha'oinus, and therefore he's poter mekorban chatos. According to the second approach of the Ramban, well, one might argue maybe etzem ha'avera poigim benefesh. That is a fact. There is a ruchniistic nature, like there's a physical nature, scientific nature, and in the teva haruchni of the world, echet is poigim. If a person is bitten by a snake, by a venomous snake, doesn't matter whether he's bad or good, whether he has intention or not. Poison pills. If you fall off a cliff, you're going to be hurt, regardless of what your intention, whether you're to blame or not to blame. So one might argue the same is with chet and avera. Even though a person is an oinus, that is the teva haruchni of the world, that every avera is malach leches and nefesh, and therefore even an oinus needs some form of kapora. However, by halachic definition, an oinus is poter makor machatas, which would seem to indicate that an oinus has no shem aveda. There is no hefza of aveda at all. And an interesting tshuva in Chasam Sofer, Orach Chaim Simen Reish Beis. Chasam Sofer deals with a person that was in jail. Once upon a time, when you were in jail by the Goyim, you had no rights. We live in a liberal world, in the Western world, in which everybody has some basic rights. But once upon a time, workers had no rights, criminals had no rights whatsoever. Just to think of it, 100 years ago, even in America, medical tests were done on inmates in jails without their consent. So anyway, the Chasam Sofer deals in Siman Reish Beis with the situation of a person that was in a goyish prison, and naturally there was no kosher food, so he had no other option but to eat nevedas atzreifis. Otherwise he would starve from hunger, he would die. However, by human nature, he was years in jail, and he wasn't really medactic shiurim. If an ill person, a cholim, has to eat in Yom Kippur, he eats the shiurim. By nature, Pliny Almighty, who was in a goyish prison, wasn't medactic in shiurim, and he ate normally. He ate l'soiva nafsho, and he wasn't medactic not to eat more than is really required by the halachic definition of pikuach nefesh. And after he was released from prison, he came, nafshoy b'sheilosai, with terrible regret. I was in prison, I ate nevelas atrefis, I enjoyed my food as much as one could probably enjoy the food that was offered in prison. But anyway, the Chasam Sofer is very makel, an interesting tshuva. And the Chasam Sofer writes that this is a similar situation as we learn in Ksubas Daf Nun Aleph. Eishes ish shenan, so tchilosa b'oinus v'soifa b'rosain. And Eishes ish was raped, nansa, and she enjoyed it at the end of the day, and that is defined as Chazal as tchilosa b'oinus v'soifa b'rosain. And there's a machlokes amaro whether she's asura l'bala or muteres l'bala. According to one argument, that is considered oinus. She was forced into it. It was against her will, and therefore muteres labala. The other opinion, I think it's Rova and Abu Shmuel, maintains that being that it was soifer l'ratzain, asur labala. And there's an interesting line of the Chasam Sofer. The Chasam Sofer writes, Ad kan lo nech lako, only whether she's muteres labala or not. whether she is prohibited to live with her husband or she is permitted. But oynish b'dei shumayim leisman bepaleg, that she has no oynish. She bears no responsibility because, after all, she was forced into this situation. So there are two chidushim in this Sefer. Chiddush number one, even according to the Shitta she'asura lebala, because that is considered rotzain, it is only in the specific and limited halacha whether she's also lebala. But oynish b'dei shemayim, no one, she bears no responsibility. And even a bigger chiddush is that our situation is similar to tchilos habaynis hasofer b'rotzon. And there we are dealing with a singular act that happened once. The beginning was by force, and ultimately, in a way, it was no longer considered a forceful act. In our situation, the person probably was there for weeks and months and years, and he enjoyed his food. So originally, basically, he had no choice, he had no option. But it still is a chiddush to consider this situation as a situation of tchilos habaynis hasofer b'rotzon. However, regarding our discussion, I see a big chiddush in this Sefer. Even according to the Shitta that this situation is defined as rotzon, there is no oynish b'dei shumayim. So kal v'choyma hadvorim, that by a classical oynis, no oynish b'dei shumayim, and that would be different than a shoygig, because according to the first approach of the Ramban, a shoygig does have a certain degree of responsibility. If he would be yoreh v'chorei v'ledvar Hashem, using the formulation, the lashon of the Ramban, he wouldn't get into this situation. Oynes is different. Now, in Minchas Osher Chumash Devorim, I wrote a lengthy discussion regarding and defining the concept of oynes, whether it's only din shupotam oynish or etzem hamaisa lo nechshav. I do not want to get into this discussion at length tonight because we are dealing with a limited discussion, and I want to take our shiur in a different angle. But I just mentioned that in Minchas Osher Devorim Mem Beis, there's a siman, there's an essay, a discussion about the definition of oynis, which I will not go over tonight. I just deal with this specific and very limited question whether there's a difference between shoygig and oynis regarding the responsibility a person bears. In Siman Kuf Tzaddik Vav, the Machava paskins in accordance to the Rambam that a person eats macholas asuros, he should not say brocha, even if he ate b'shoygig. Naturally, if he ate b'shoygig, then the question cannot be regarding brocha l'shoyna, because he wasn't aware that it's macholas asuros, so obviously he made a brocha. But when he became aware after eating the food that it's macholas asuros, whether he has to say a brocha achroina. So the Rambam writes, quoted by the Rambam, Kuf Tzaddik Vav Sif Aleph in Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, even a shoygig is exempt from the brocha. He's not required, actually prohibited from saying a brocha. The Beis Yosef says only shoygig. Oynes should say a brocha, and the Taz and Sivkot not disputes his opinion. According to the Taz, even an oynes should not, even an oynes does not say a brocha, because after all, it's a ma'isa avera. After all, it's macholas asuros. So we find an interesting machlokes according to the Beis Yosef. Oynes is like heter gomer, no definition of chet, and therefore one should say a brocha. According to the Taz, after all, isser is isser, avera is avera. The person bears no responsibility, but etzem hachefze is a chefze of avera, and therefore there is no brocha. The Magen Avraham draws a distinction. What type of an oynes are we dealing with? In Siman Reish Daled, the Magen Avraham says, if a person is forced to eat and he doesn't intend to eat, that situation, no brocha. But if a person in a pekuach nefesh situation, lahatzal nafsho lefakech et nafsho eats, he is required to say a brocha. The Magen Avraham doesn't really explain or give the rationale to this chiluk, to this psak, but there's some sofer in the above mentioned tshuva in Siman Reish Beis in Orach Chaim has a very logical approach, and he says, what is the essence of a brocha? gratitude. A person thanks HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he created and supplied the means of existence, of sustenance. So if a person is not only in a situation in which he eats l'sov hanafsho, but of pikuach nefesh, alachas kamo v'kamo. Of course, he has tzorach lahoidos shivosayim. It is not only that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the means of sustenance to live and serve him, but when it's direct pikuach nefesh, then he definitely should make a bracha. So up to this point, I just discussed the Ramban and the various different interpretations and commentaries dealing with the chait of Eitz Hadas of Adam HaRishon, the opinions that assume that Adam HaRishon was an oines, or at least a shoigig, and not amazing. I wrote a tshuva a few months ago regarding a terribly disturbing situation that happened somewhere in the world. Because I don't want anybody to try to figure out, maybe some of you heard about this shiloh or not. All I could say is that this happened on planet Earth. I won't go beyond that. But one of the best chshedim that Charedim rely on, Bosor Shelo Nimlach, was sold and supplied to the public. It was a tragic and terrible mistake that happened, and Malicha wasn't performed. So Issa Gomer of Dam, and that Bosa was sold. And the question was, the only way of being Monea Michshel of the Rabbim was making it publicly known in the newspaper, in the Haredi press, that the Bosa that was sold to the public on this day by this and this hechsher, there's a chashash yisor, and it would be terribly embarrassing and even devastating to the body that gave that hechsher that this should be made public. It would also be a pegia in Koyda Torah, in the Rabbanim that stand behind this hechsher, and some of the Rabbanim argued that maybe there is no chiyuv to make this public, because the people coming into the shops and buying the meat, first of all, could rely on roiv. The roiv boser that's being sold in those kosher shops with this kosher hechsher definitely is kosher. Only a small quantity of prohibited products were sold. And beyond that point, the people relying on the hechsher are definitely defined as an oines. And so if they have no avera whatsoever, are we required are we required to make it known that people shouldn't eat this meat, or which brings us back to the question, how do we define a matzav of oines? I made it very clear, in my opinion, that we have to draw a very clear distinction. It might sound like a chiddush, but to me it's no chiddush whatsoever, between the gaver and the chefza. And I have a very simple argument. Would it be reasonable to say that a person could take 100 God-fearing Jews and say, I want you to build my house and you have to work on Shabbos. I want you to plow my field. I want you to harvest my field. And I want you to work on Shabbos. And if you won't do so, I'm going to kill you. Well, those people, pikuach nefesh is derech kol haTorah kula. And this is a pikuach nefesh situation. If somebody says, Chalal Shabbos, if not, we're going to kill you, then that's pikuach nefesh. So they're oines gomo. So they have no aveda. So does he have an aveda? What's his aveda? Lifnei v'loisit michshel, but it's not a michshel. If they're an oines, then they're tzadikim gemurim. It's not considered an aveda. So obviously he has no aveda, because we cannot say this is lifnei v'loisit michshel. If they have no chait, then why does he have a chait? Well, one might argue he still has an aveda of oinoas devorim. Lotonu ish et re'eu. Oinoas devorim is, you're not allowed to be goydem tzar to a person verbally. So you have no right to threaten these people that you're going to kill them, and that's an avera. That would be a joke. everybody understands that this is totally unreasonable. Well, Reb Shlomo Zalman deals with this problem in his own special style. Mincha Shloime Chelek Aleph, Siman Zayin, Oz Beis, and he doesn't come up with a reasonable answer. He just says that it doesn't make sense that this would be permissible. To me, it is very clear. The concept of a michshol regarding Lifnei Yevalos michshol, and the concept of an issur regarding the chiyuv la'afrusha mi'isura has nothing to do with the responsibility of the gavra. When we are required to la'afrusha mi'isura, to keep a person away from Aveda, it is not to save him from his oynish, from his punishment. Lifnei Yevalos michshol is not a prohibition to cause a person to be punished, but etzem hachet hu michshol she'ein kedugmosoy. Etzem hachet hu to'eva neged ritzon Hashem, and therefore, regardless of the question, whether the transgressor will bear responsibility or not, regardless of the question, is he a mazid or a shoygig or even an oinus? It's a lav goma and issa d'oraisa of Lifnei Yevalos michshol, causing a person to be over any avera. Even if he will be an oinus, I cause him to be an oinus, and therefore he obviously bears no responsibility. He will not be reprimanded. He will not be punished. Nevertheless, it's Lifnei Yevalos michshol. Now, I'm aware that b'dakas inyan one could argue like this. The concept of an oinus is only when regarding the person that did the ma'aseh. He is an oinus, but you're the one that caused the oinus, so you can't have a teretz of oinus. You cannot reap the benefit of oinus when you're the one that intentionally caused the situation. But I reject this argument because Lifnei Yevalos michshol starts by the nichshal, and if it's no aveda to him, obviously it cannot be an aveda to me, and therefore the only reasonable formulation to solve this strange shaila is Lifnei Yevalos michshol has nothing to do with the gavra. Regardless, totally ignoring the question, does he bear any degree of responsibility? Because going back to the beginning of this year, I draw a line of distinction between shoygig and oinus. Shoygig, maybe, depends on the two different interpretations of the Ramban. Oinus bears no responsibility, but nevertheless there still is Lifnei Yevalos michshol, and therefore it's clear to me. If one Jew tells another, if you're not going to be Mechal Shabbos, I'm going to kill you, well, the person that's threatened has to be Mechal Shabbos. But the person that threatens the other is over on issa d'oraisa of Lifnei Yevalos titen michshol ki etzem hachet le'olam hu michshol v'lo chashuv mi she'over al hachet hu shoygeg or meizid or oinus, has nothing to do with Lifnei Yevalos michshol. And in the same reasoning I argue chiyuv lefusha mi'isura. And therefore, my opinion was that immediately there has to be a publicity blitz, and it has to be made known that machshelo tachas yedenu, and that was my very clear opinion. And this brings us back to the tragic story that happened in Muncie some years ago. Meat was sold with a very good hechsher, and then it became aware that for quite a while the meat wasn't kosher, and many people at the time totally heartbroken. Many gedolim dealt with the question: do the people that ate non-kosher meat, do they need tikkunei tshuva? Do they bear any responsibility? And in the tshuva I wrote at the time, and I brought both these tshuvas in the kuntas this week. I wrote my opinion that based on the Sam Sofer and many other tshuvas in the gedolim that we find, after all, behemten shel tzadikim en HaKadosh Baruch Hu maybe tekol al yodam tzadikim altzman lo kol sheken. That's a mama that we find many times in Shas, and therefore people do bear a certain degree of spiritual responsibility, not direct but indirect. some kind of a ruchniistic pgam, and therefore I said they should make a Yom Tshuva and a Yom Tefillah, and people should fast one day and give tzedakah, but not beyond that, because I wrote at great length similar situations, and most importantly, most significantly, there seems to be a stira between two different halachas, the Gemara and Yevamis, and the Ramon Mekuf Tzedekei and Hilchos Neder. When a person is nichshal ba'oines, whether he needs kapora or does not need kapora, and the basic argument and the basic approach that I wrote up in that tshuva was, if it would be expected to act with caution, even though halachically a person is not mechuyev to do so, but if it would be naturally expected to exercise special caution, then one needs kapora. He does bear a certain level of responsibility, but when it would be totally unreasonable to expect a person to be cautious beyond what is required. In that situation, he needs no kapora. And I think in our modern day and age, what could a person do beyond relying on a good hechsher with a good reputation? The modern world and the modern food industry is such that it is totally beyond our ability to check things personally. What could a person do besides relying on a really good hechsher with a good reputation? And therefore, my basic opinion was that there is no avera biyodam. It's tragic, it's heartbreaking, but these people didn't have to have a guilty conscience all their lives. So I said they should make a Yom Tefillah, and everybody should give tzedakah. Those that have the ability should fast one day, and not beyond that. So what we discussed today is a very general discussion defining avera, ba'oines, or b'shoigig. And the springboard for this discussion, or the point we embarked from the Medrash regarding Chet Odom Harishon. The Medrash at Odom Harishon was a shoigig, and Chava was the one that ultimately bared responsibility, the Nochesh for being Machshel Chava and Chava for being Machshel Odom. But nevertheless, that is the Chet of Odom Harishon. And if some of you are familiar with Kabbalah, that is the Shviras HaKelim and Pizur HaNetzotzot, and the entire Avodah, all these thousands of years, all has to do with the Chet of the Nochesh HaKadmoni and the Chet of Odom Harishon, which actually changed the entire nature of the world. Everything was altered, everything was changed. The Gra even writes that Koidem Chet Odom Harishon, we all, the entire world, was an Olam HaYetzirah, which is another realm of existence. We know that in Kabbalah there are Dalad Olamis, based on a posuk in Navi: Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. And according to the Mekabolim, the world we know and experience and see and hear and touch, our realm of existence is an Olam Asiyah. Lamala Ma'asiyah, there's Yetzirah, Lamala Mimeno Bria, and Atzilus is above and beyond the realm of our understanding. We cannot reach to Atzilus. So according to the Gra, Lifnei Chet Odom Harishon was an Olam Yetzirah, and the Chet of Odom Harishon altered the entire course of the world and of nature, and everything has changed. But that is a Kabbalah concept and something with which we will not be dealing today. As I said in the beginning of this year, we once again start Parshas Bereishis, and in Rashi in the beginning of Torah's Moshe. Bereishis Boro, B'shvil Yisrael shenikro Reishis, B'shvil Torah shenikro Reishis. All the rest is just the background. This is the world, the center of creation. One of the shiurim I gave on Chol HaMoed, I made an interesting comment. When the Meram Lublin many times writes, Makshin Oilam, the world asks a question. Which world? 1.5 billion Chinese obviously aren't very much aware of the Maram Melublin. 1 billion Indians probably never heard of the Maram Melublin. The vast majority of 370 Americans probably also aren't very much troubled by the kasha, the Makshin Oilam of Maram Melublin. So, who is the Makshin Oilam? To my dismay, most of our brethren aren't very much aware of the Maram Melublin. Baruch Hashem, while there are tens of thousands of Amelei Torah, hundreds of thousands that are concerned with the kashas of Maram Melublin. That is the world. That is our world. That is probably the world which Rashi alludes to when Rashi quotes from Chazal, Bereishis Boro, Bishvil Torah Shenikuracious, Bishvil Yisrael Shenikuracious. So when we learn in Chazal, sometimes it can give you a very haughty feeling. You know, I am so important. Everything was created for me. But that is not the proper reaction. It should give us a tremendous feeling of humbleness and responsibility. What a tremendous koyved rosh. What tremendous responsibility that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world and the entire universe for us. And that puts upon our shoulders a tremendous responsibility and obligation, and the depth of this feeling is extremely humble. Could we rise to the challenge? Are we fitting? The individual, every individual in Kabbalah is called a Olam Kotan. Every individual with his personal HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this awesome feeling that we bear responsibility. And the entirety of creation is for the individual that serves HaKadosh Baruch Hu. B'shvil Yisrael Shenikuracious, B'shvil Torah Shenikuracious, B'shvili Nivra Ha'olam. It is way beyond the realm of our understanding how all this interacts. I mean, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu create such an immense world and such a complex system and laws of nature for the Yechidim Asher Shem Hashem Nikru Aleim? This is something we cannot really decipher. These are the Soidas Abriya, the Soidas of Hanogas Oelam. But we learn Divrei Chazal, the Emunah Tmimo, the Pashtus, the entirety of creation, the entire universe, all is tied in a way, above and beyond the realm of our understanding. B'shvil Yisrael Shenikuracious, B'shvil Torah Shenikuracious. We just finished the Yomim Tovim, the magnificent Yomim Tovim. The culmination of the Yom Tovim is Simchas Torah, starting off with Chodesh Elul and Slichas and Rosh Hashanah and Aseh Semichuv and Yom Kippurim and then Sukkot and Simcha Shmini Atzeres and Chusas. We have 2 days Simchas Torah. That is how we say goodbye. And Chazal say Shmini Atzeres says Koshalai Pridaschem. After the king made a great festival and invited all the nations, all the countries in his empire, and everybody came, and it was a big festival. Shivim Porim, Mekravno, the Shivim Umois. And on the last day, the king tells his really loved, closest friends and family, when all the others leave, let's stay together. Let's have a day for ourselves to enjoy each other, the company. Kodesh Baruch Hu tells Klal Yisrael, Kol Shalai Pedaschem, and Shemini says there's only one power for Klal Yisrael, in contrast to the Shivim Purim that we offered as a sacrifice for Umis Oilam. Kol Shalai Pedaschem. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us Simchas Torah. So I always say a moshel. Children came a long way, a long, long and difficult way. They had to scale mountains and cross rivers until they finally find themselves together with their parents, with their father, and they embrace each other and kiss and hug. After a few days, the father notices that his kids seem to be extremely sad, and he asks them what's wrong, and they say, well, it was such an effort to get here, and we have to leave. We have families, we have businesses, we have bills, we have to go back home, and chaval, it's a pity that we have to say goodbye. And the father says, Kinderlach, I have a pleasant surprise for you. We do not have to say goodbye. You came to me. I packed my briefcase and I'm coming together with you. And we will be staying together. So Kodesh Baruch Hu says, as long as you have Simchas Torah, we do not have to say goodbye. In the sukkah, we had the schus, the privilege to sit with the shiva ushpizin. The level of kirva and dveikus and kirvas elakim one could achieve by Talmud Torah is far greater than anything we could experience in the sukkah. And there's an unbelievable mama in Tona de Belior Perek Yud Ches. Every Jew that learns, Kol Talmud Shekoyre B'Shoyne V'Yosi B'Torah Kodesh Baruch Hu Yoshev Kenegdo V'Yosi Kimoy Ile Molei Dov Ezekosov Asura Yala Omro V'Kolo Omro Chayev Misa. But that is the Torah of Eliyahu Hanavi. A Kodesh Baruch Hu Yoshev Kenegdo V'Yosi Kimoy. That is the way we have to feel when we have the schos of learning Torah b'simcha, b'amol, b'shashua, and Torah l'shma. And sometimes late at night when I sit in my house and learn and everything is quiet, everybody is asleep, I have this overwhelming feeling. I just remember and recall that line from the Tona de B'Eliyahu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yoshev Kenegdo V'Yosi Kimoy. What a tremendous feeling of Kovid Rosh on one hand and Simcha on the other hand. So, when we start off Bereshis once again and embark on a new year of Simchas HaTorah, Eisek HaTorah, and as long as we rejoice in Torah, B'Simchasa, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us. There is a limit how long feet could dance. You dance until you get tired and you could dance no longer. There is no limit how long a heart could dance and sing and praise and rejoice. So when the hakafas are over, Simchas HaTorah still must be with us, in our hearts, in our neshamas. So Yehiratzim, we should have a year of Simchas Torah. A year of good health and peace and prosperity for the land of Israel, for Jews throughout the world. Hatzlocha enachas, bona, chaya, umezayna, ravicha. We should experience Simchas Torah every day in this coming year, and in the schus of Talmud Torah. Shakadosh Baruch Hu yirachem aleinu, v'yishlach lanu es Moshiach tzidkeinu b'mheiro v'yomeinu. Amen.